Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our Harkness Mathematics Teaching and Learning discussion and conversation. In today's video, I would like to explore a role of a teacher in a Harkness Mathematics classroom. And that's not an easy one to dive into because it can be quite broad, but I think I've found one analogy that works quite well with how a good approach to being a teacher in such a complex system, such as a Harkness classroom, can be done. And let me share my screen. Just to come back to this diagram we talked about earlier about building blocks that students are creating, and then they're stacked in whichever form and time they come in to try to build this structure towards some kind of an overarching goal that a teacher has selected for the course that they're teaching. And that's where we're trying to get these ideas that are generated around the table to go. You want to have these blocks being delivered by the students at the table, and then hopefully by sorting through them and identifying what's important, what's not, and what's usable and what's not, and polishing them and maybe turning them around and stacking them, because they're not going to stack perfectly all the time. In fact, most of the time they won't stack perfectly at all. It takes a bit of creativity to fold them and maybe modify them ever so slightly, that you can actually start building a structure. And so a different analogy that can be brought forward in terms of, we talked about the lesson plan cycle with the homework, the exploration, extended problems. Well, it connects nicely, in my opinion, to this. And it's a little bit silly, but it actually does connect to it nicely. It's starting and keeping a fire. That's the best analogy I could come up with in terms of what the role of a teacher is. So to start a fire, you'd need to prepare the materials, which you can see here. Interestingly enough, there's also a triangle being formed here: the heat, the oxygen, the fuel. What could possibly relate this to the 3-point lesson cycle that we talked about? And so you need the materials, which is the fuel. The oxygen is kind of always there, and then you need also the heat. But all of these things have to come, the materials have to come before any of the burning starts. Then they are positioned in a way and assembled in a way that is appropriate and will be successful. So this comes into a plan of, okay, so I'm going to have these tasks for them to start, this type of homework for them to do. Maybe these questions at the back of my mind, or that might be asked, and this is how we're going to approach them. And I selected those special problems in a particular way because this problem will lead into this problem will lead into that. And then by gathering all that together and stacking them in the appropriate way, we could get going. And then the class would begin by a teacher perhaps initiating something, or maybe it's somebody else, maybe it's a student introducing something, but there needs to be a start. So that could be the ignition, a question, maybe a presentation, a comment, anything that begins the conversation, and then the fire will get going. Now, when it's starting to burn, it will obviously sometimes burn too little, which will need to add a little bit of fuel into it, or maybe do a little bit of poking. That's how fire is kept. You poke around a little bit, and then it starts to, you increase the oxygen level, and the fire gets going. So that could mean the teacher could interject by throwing an idea, or maybe trying to relate 2 points of view that were presented, so that it feeds more oxygen into the discussion, and then it keeps going. Sometimes it gets too heated, like all of a sudden you have a flame that's too hard to contain. You're going to have things starting to go out of control a little bit. And this is, again, teacher would come in being present in the room at the table, and try to calm things down a little bit. Maybe trying to say, okay, let's take a moment to reflect upon what's been done, and then come back to it in a minute with this question perhaps, or a quick change of task and say, okay, now you talk to your partner about this idea, and then you would go on to continue further. So all of these teacher moves that can happen, they either put more oxygen into the, or sometimes maybe more fuel, if more fuel is needed, maybe another problem, another something that could be brought into it to increase the flame, or just simply poking around with what's already there, and getting more oxygen flow, or maybe both. And also, of course, when it gets too much, the move can be to subdue the discussion, to make it, to bring it back to where it needs to be, to recenter. That's another move that could be there. Some people ask me, is leading a Harkness discussion, and leading, I don't really like the word leading, because the teacher's not really leading it. There's not really a leader. There shouldn't be. There's an adult in the room, yes, but or let's say more of an expert in the room, if we're talking not high school type setting, maybe post-secondary setting, could be not necessarily age-wise difference, but we have an expert in the room, and the expert has the ability to control this, but they're not necessarily leading the way. Because when any type of leading is happening, it's no longer a discussion. It's more of everybody listening to this one person and doing what they're telling everybody to do, which isn't quite a Harkness discussion. It's more of a Socratic seminar, perhaps, which isn't Harkness. And so people ask me, is it like a conductor of the orchestra? And at first I thought, yeah, that's probably kind of similar. But then the more I think about it, the more I disagree with that statement, because a conductor really tells people, or musicians in that case, when to play, how to play. Are they too much? Are they too little? Like that part of kind of there, but conductor is very much at the center, which we're not trying to do at all. The teacher is not in a center position. The teacher is there as a facilitator and as a keeper of the fire that's going, and maybe a starter of the fire, but it's not, the teacher directly is not, the teacher is not the one who is doing all the work to get the fire burning. The fire is burning because there's things there to have them burn, not because teacher is standing there and looking at it. Like, that's not the reason why, burning it with your eyes kind of thing. And that's the major difference, is that the process is happening regardless of if the teacher is speaking or not, for example, but the process is still happening, and that's where it needs to be. It needs to be at the level where it's self-sufficient, but also in a very controlled environment, where it doesn't get too little or too big, depending on what's happening. The one last step that I'm actually still struggling with, and it kind of depends on from one situation to another, and it relates very well to this picture, is the extinguishing of the fire, in the sense that should there be a move by the teacher to get that done at the end, where it says, okay, now we're done, let us do something else, or do you let the conversation continue and kind of leave the room, so to speak, and go somewhere else, but students still have it at the back of their mind? This is something that I battle with constantly in terms of my own practice, is that sometimes a little summary is good, and sometimes the summary doesn't fit at the end. There's no extinguishing that needs to happen, and I would actually prefer the conversation or the thinking at least, to continue as the students have left the room and I'm no longer with them. But I still want them to be thinking about what we've talked about. And that's kind of a decision that a teacher needs to make for each. I would believe that they have to make in each given situation. Sometimes a summary, or I would call it extinguishing, of what was going on can happen. Or sometimes no summary is needed. And it's good to just end it by saying, okay, thank you very much for all your work today, and see you later, without much of a summary, just because of, you know, the bell goes or whatever, the time's up and away you go. So an interesting analogy that I thought could be helpful, but in any case, speaking of time, I think we've reached the point of the end of this one. If one takeaway message would be from the role of a teacher in the Harkness Mathematics Classroom is someone who is taking care of the process, but not leading the way and at the center of the attention. That would be the major takeaway for me. Feel free to send your comments and questions. The email will be just after in the credits. Feel free to take a look at the website, and yeah, any feedback's great. Do let me know if you have any of those. Until next time, take care, and bye-bye.